In 1923, a Brooklyn health inspector wrote that the smell coming from a Carroll Gardens tenement was evidence of unsanitary foreign cooking. That inspector had never tasted Sunday gravy. Number 17 on this list was so misunderstood that landlords tried to ban it from apartment buildings. Number 8 used a part of the animal that American butchers literally gave away for free. Number 3 involved a preservation technique so ancient that food scientists are only now proving it creates beneficial bacteria modern probiotics cannot replicate. These 25 dishes were cooked behind closed doors, not because these women were ashamed, because America told them their food was wrong. Meanwhile, the foods they were hiding would become the foundation of the most beloved cuisine in America. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 secret foods Italian immigrants cooked when nobody was looking. Number 25. Pasta e fagioli was cooked low and slow on cast iron stoves in tenement kitchens where 4 families shared a single hallway. Italian mothers soaked dried cannellini beans overnight, then simmered them with garlic, tomato paste, and whatever short pasta was cheapest at the corner shop on Union Street. A pound of dried beans cost 3 cents in 1921. A box of ditalini cost maybe 5 cents. Together, they fed a family of 8 for 2 days. The trick was cooking the pasta directly in the bean broth, so the starch thickened everything into something closer to a stew than a soup. American neighbors called it peasant slop. Italian grandmothers called it survival. The dish was so filling that dock workers at the Red Hook piers carried jars of it wrapped in newspaper, eating cold spoonfuls between loading shifts. Children scraped the pot for the crusty bit stuck to the bottom, the part where the beans had caramelized against the iron. That was the prize. No Italian mother threw that pot away without soaking it first. Every calorie mattered. Every flavor was earned. Number 24. Dandelion greens foraged from empty lots. Before the city paved over every inch of open ground, Italian women in Bensonhurst and Bay Ridge would walk the vacant lots with paper bags, picking wild dandelion greens that American families sprayed with poison or mowed down without a thought. Sautéed with garlic and olive oil, finished with a squeeze of lemon, those bitter greens showed up on dinner tables 3 nights a week in spring. The bitterness aided digestion, something Italian folk medicine understood centuries before modern gastroenterology confirmed it. A family could gather enough greens in 20 minutes to feed everyone for free. Neighbors whispered about the strange Italian women picking weeds, but those weeds contained more iron than spinach, more calcium than milk, and more vitamin A than carrots. The women knew. They had always known. Number 23. Polenta made from coarse yellow cornmeal was the silent backbone of northern Italian immigrant kitchens. Women from Veneto and Friuli stirred enormous pots for 40 minutes straight, wooden spoon in one hand, rosary beads on the counter, the cornmeal bubbling and spitting like something alive. A 5-pound sack of cornmeal cost a dime in 1924 and lasted 2 weeks. Poured onto a wooden board, it cooled into a firm, golden slab that could be sliced and fried the next morning, or served soft under a ladle of rabbit stew. American grocers stocked it only because Southern farmers used it for animal feed. Italian grandmothers bought it by the armload, knowing something the rest of the country would take 100 years to figure out. Polenta was the original comfort food, and nobody outside those tenement kitchens had a clue. Number 22, bacala. Salt cod was soaked for 3 days in cold water, and the water had to be changed every 8 hours. The smell alone could clear a hallway. Landlords on President Street posted notices forbidding the soaking of fish in communal sinks. So Italian families kept buckets under their beds, behind curtains, on fire escapes, anywhere the salt cod could rehydrate in secret. Once soaked and desalted, the fish was fried in olive oil with garlic and peppers, or simmered in tomato sauce for Christmas Eve. A single piece of dried bacala cost 15 cents and could feed 6 people after soaking tripled its size. The preservation method, heavy salting and air drying, dated back 500 years. It was how Mediterranean families survived winters without refrigeration. In Brooklyn, it became the food you cooked with the windows sealed tight, praying the neighbors did not complain to the building superintendent. Number 21. Escarole and beans, married bitter greens with creamy cannellini in a one-pot meal that cost almost nothing. Italian mothers wilted a whole head of escarole in olive oil and garlic, added cooked beans and a cup of broth, then simmered until the greens went silky and the liquid turned thick. Some families added a ham bone or a rind of Parmigiano for depth. The dish showed up on tables during Lent, on lean Fridays, and any night when the pay envelope came up short. It was not a soup, not a salad, not a side dish. It was simply what Italian families ate when there was nothing else, and it was better than almost everything else on the block. Number 20. Fried cardoons, dipped in egg batter and dropped into sizzling olive oil, appeared on Christmas Eve tables across South Brooklyn like clockwork. The thistle-like stalks, related to artichokes, grew wild in southern Italy, but had to be sourced from Italian pushcart vendors in Brooklyn because no American grocer would stock them. Women peeled the fibrous strings from each stalk with a paring knife, boiled the pieces until tender, then dredged them in flour and beaten egg before frying them golden. The taste was delicate, almost nutty, with a faint bitterness that paired with lemon. Children fought over the crispiest pieces. Fathers ate them standing at the stove, burning their fingers and swearing in dialect. Inside, they were sacred. Number 19. Tripe braised in tomato sauce simmered for hours in pots that perfumed entire apartment buildings. Italian butchers on Court Street sold honeycomb tripe for nearly nothing because American customers refused to touch it. Immigrant women scrubbed the tripe, boiled it twice to remove any lingering smell, then braised it slowly in garlic, tomato, and red pepper flakes until it turned tender enough to cut with a spoon. The final dish was served with crusty bread for soaking up the sauce. A pound of tripe cost 4 cents. A pot of braised tripe fed a family for 2 meals. Health inspectors flagged the smell. Neighbors complained. But behind closed doors, Italian families were turning offal into something American restaurants would charge $20 a plate for a century later. Number 18. Stuffed artichokes appeared on Sunday tables as a show of skill and pride. Italian mothers trimmed the sharp leaf tips with scissors, spread the leaves open like a flower, and packed every crevice with a mixture of seasoned breadcrumbs, garlic, grated pecorino, and parsley. The artichokes stood upright in a heavy pot with olive oil and water in the bottom, then steamed until the outer leaves pulled away with a gentle tug. Each leaf was a small reward, scraped between the teeth to get at the breadcrumb filling and tender flesh. The heart at the center was the grand prize, soft and buttery, fought over by children who had been patient enough to work through every leaf. A single artichoke cost a nickel from the pushcart. The preparation took an hour, but in kitchens where cooking was an act of identity, that hour was never wasted. Number 17. Hanging salami from the fire escape ceiling or bedroom rafters was the act that drew the most suspicion from American authorities. Italian families made soppressata and dried sausage at home, grinding pork with fennel seed, black pepper, and red wine, stuffing the mixture into natural casings, then hanging them to cure in the cold winter air. The curing took 4 to 6 weeks. The smell was unmistakable. Building managers posted warnings. Neighbors filed complaints. One Brooklyn newspaper in 1925 ran a story about fire escape meat as evidence of immigrant backwardness. But those sausages, cured slowly in the open air, developed complex flavors that factory-produced salami could never match. The natural fermentation created lactic acid that preserved the meat without refrigeration and produced beneficial bacteria that modern science now classifies as probiotic. Those Italian grandmothers were not being primitive. They were practicing a form of food science that predated pasteurization by centuries. Number 16. Rapini, also called broccoli rabi, was so bitter that American produce vendors could not give it away. Italian mothers bought bunches for a penny each and sautéed them with garlic, olive oil, and crushed red pepper until the bitterness mellowed into something rich and slightly sweet. Tossed with orecchiette or piled onto crusty bread with a slice of sharp provolone, rapini became a staple of the immigrant diet. The intense flavor was an acquired taste, and Italian children learned to eat it young. Those who resisted got a look from their mother that required no translation. Nutritionists now rank broccoli rabe among the most nutrient-dense vegetables on Earth, packed with vitamins K, A, and C, plus cancer-fighting compounds called glucosinolates. The Italian women who cooked it every week did not know the chemistry. They knew it kept the family healthy through Brooklyn winters when fresh produce was scarce and expensive. Number 15. Braciole, thin slices of beef pounded flat, spread with garlic, parsley, pecorino, and pine nuts, then rolled tight and tied with butcher's string. These bundles simmered for hours in Sunday gravy, the tomato sauce that was the centerpiece of every Italian immigrant household. Pounding it thin was not just technique, it was economics. A single pound could yield 4 rolls, each one absorbing the sauce until the meat turned impossibly tender. When the braciole was finally sliced open, the spiral of filling inside looked like a work of art. Children watched wide-eyed as their mothers untied the strings and arranged the slices on a platter. The men ate first, then the women, then the children got whatever was left. Nobody complained. There was always enough bread to soak up the rest. Number 14. Zeppoli were fried dough balls, dusted in powdered sugar or filled with custard, that appeared at feast days and saint celebrations throughout South Brooklyn. Italian mothers mixed simple dough from flour, water, yeast, and a pinch of salt, let it rise, then dropped spoonfuls into hot oil until golden and puffed. The cost was almost nothing. The effect was enormous. Children lined up in kitchens, hands outstretched, sugar dusting their shirts and coating their lips. On the Feast of San Gennaro, pushcart vendors sold them on Mulberry Street in Manhattan. But the real ones, the ones old-timers still talk about, were made at home in Brooklyn, fried in lard in a cast-iron skillet by a grandmother who measured nothing and timed everything by sound. Number 13. Pasta con le sarde, a Sicilian dish of sardines, wild fennel, pine nuts, and currants tossed with bucatini, confused every non-Italian who ever caught a whiff of it. The combination of fish and dried fruit struck Americans as bizarre, but in the tenement kitchens of Carroll Gardens, it was a masterpiece. Canned sardines cost a few cents a tin. Fennel grew wild in empty lots. Pine nuts and currants were bought in tiny quantities from Italian grocers. The dish was sweet, salty, briny, and rich all at once. Nothing in the American cookbook of the 1920s came close. It was Sicily on a plate, cooked in secret, eaten in private, and remembered across generations. Number 12. Fried squash blossoms filled with ricotta and anchovy were the jewel of summer kitchens. Italian families who kept small backyard gardens in Red Hook and Bensonhurst harvested the bright orange flowers in the early morning before the sun wilted them. Each blossom was gently opened, stuffed with a spoonful of fresh ricotta mixed with a sliver of anchovy, then dipped in a light batter and fried until the petals turned golden and lacy. The taste was delicate, creamy, and faintly salty, unlike anything in the American culinary vocabulary. Neighbors peering over backyard fences saw Italian women picking flowers from vegetable plants and assumed they were confused about gardening. They were not confused. They were cooking something extraordinary from a part of the plant everyone else threw away. Number 11. Ciabatta, a thick vegetable stew of eggplant, peppers, zucchini, potatoes, and tomatoes, simmered on the stove through the hottest months of summer. Every Italian mother had her own version, and every version was correct. The vegetables were whatever the garden or the pushcart offered that week. They were cut into rough chunks, sautéed in olive oil, then stewed until they collapsed into one another, creating a dish that was more than the sum of its parts. A pot of ciabatta cost pennies to make and fed the family for days. Served with bread, it was a complete meal. Served cold the next day, it was even better. American neighbors smelled the garlic and onion and assumed something was wrong. Something was very, very right. Number 10. Pizzelle, thin waffle-like cookies pressed in an ornate iron mold, heated over the stove burner, filled kitchens with the scent of anise and vanilla during holidays. Italian grandmothers poured batter into the hinged iron, pressed it shut, and counted to 30 before revealing a golden, lace-patterned cookie that shattered at the first bite. The molds were brought from Italy, passed from mother to daughter, each one seasoned with decades of use. A batch of 24 pizzelle required only flour, eggs, sugar, and a tablespoon of anise extract. The cost was negligible. The skill was everything. Too much batter and the cookie was thick and chewy. Too little and it crumbled before it left the iron. These were not sold in any American bakery. They existed only inside Italian homes, offered to guests with espresso, and hidden from anyone who might not understand. Number 9. Fennel sausage made from scratch in kitchen sinks and on dining tables pushed against the wall. Italian fathers and grandfathers ground pork shoulder by hand, mixed it with fennel seed, red pepper flakes, salt, and a splash of red wine, then stuffed the mixture into natural casings using a hand-crank stuffer clamped to the table's edge. The whole family helped. Children tied off links, mothers seasoned the meat. The sausage was cooked fresh within days, fried in a pan until the casing crackled and the fat rendered out golden and fragrant. A pound of pork shoulder cost 8 cents. The fennel seed came from a jar that never seemed to empty. The result was a sausage so intensely flavored that one link on a roll with peppers and onions became the iconic street food of a generation. But it started at home, in those cramped Brooklyn kitchens made by hands that carried the memory of another country. Number 8. Pork skin braciole used the rind that American butchers trimmed off and discarded. Italian women asked for it by name, and butchers handed it over for free, happy to be rid of it. The skin was scraped clean, cut into rectangles, spread with garlic, parsley, and pecorino, rolled tight, tied with string, and dropped into the Sunday gravy alongside meatballs and sausage. After hours of simmering, the skin turned gelatinous and tender, melting on the tongue with a richness that no cut of meat could match. The collagen in the skin thickened the sauce and added body. It was a secret ingredient hidden inside a dish everyone already loved. American families smelled that Sunday gravy through the walls and never knew that the magic came from something their own butchers threw in the garbage. Number 7. Sfogliatelle, the shell-shaped pastry with 1,000 thin layers of dough encasing a sweet ricotta and semolina filling, represented the pinnacle of Neapolitan baking skill. Italian women in Brooklyn spent entire mornings stretching paper-thin dough across kitchen tables, brushing it with lard, rolling it into a log, slicing it into discs, and shaping each one into a ridged shell before filling and baking. The crust shattered at the first bite, flaking into buttery shards, while the filling was warm, creamy, and faintly perfumed with orange zest and cinnamon. No American bakery attempted them. The skill required was too great, the labor too intense. These existed only in Italian kitchens, baked for feast days and special occasions, offered with a cup of strong coffee and the quiet pride of a woman who had learned from her mother, who had learned from hers. Number 6. Rabbit cacciatore made use of the live rabbits that Italian families raised in backyard hutches and basement cages throughout Brooklyn. The practice horrified American neighbors. City ordinances tried to stop it, but Italian families had raised rabbits for centuries, and a single breeding pair could produce enough meat to supplement the family diet year-round. The rabbit was cleaned, jointed, browned in olive oil, then braised with tomatoes, olives, capers, rosemary, and white wine until the meat fell from the bone. The flavor was delicate, leaner than chicken, with a sweetness that absorbed the sauce beautifully. Children who helped feed the rabbits learned early not to name them. That was the rule. You fed them, you cleaned the hutch, and when the time came, you ate without complaint. It was the oldest agreement between humans and animals, practiced in a new country where the old ways survived behind basement doors. Number 5. Giardiniera, a pickled vegetable relish of cauliflower, celery, carrots, peppers, and olives packed in vinegar and olive oil, lined the pantry shelves of every Italian household. Women spent late summer days chopping, blanching, and jarring vegetables using a preservation method that predated canning by centuries. The jars lasted through winter, providing crunchy, tangy vegetables when nothing fresh was available. One afternoon of work produced enough giardiniera to last 6 months. The vinegar brine created an acidic environment hostile to harmful bacteria, and the olive oil layer on top sealed out oxygen. Italian grandmothers had no word for anaerobic preservation, yet they practiced it flawlessly. Number 4. Fresh ricotta made at home from a gallon of whole milk, a splash of white vinegar, and a pinch of salt. Italian mothers heated the milk just below boiling, added the acid, watched the curds form in seconds, then strained them through cheesecloth draped over a colander. Within an hour, they had a pound of fresh ricotta that was sweeter, creamier, and more delicate than anything sold in stores. It went into cannoli filling, lasagna, stuffed shells, and onto bread with a drizzle of honey for children's breakfast. A gallon of milk cost 12 cents in 1924. That single gallon produced enough ricotta for 3 meals. The leftover whey was saved for bread dough, adding protein and a faint tang. Nothing was wasted. Every drop served a purpose. Number 3. Preserved tomatoes were put up in glass jars during a single frenzied week in late August, when bushels of San Marzano tomatoes arrived by truck from New Jersey farms. Entire families gathered in backyards, on stoops, and in basement kitchens for the annual ritual. Tomatoes were washed, blanched, peeled, crushed by hand, and packed into sterilized jars with a leaf of fresh basil. The jars were sealed and boiled in enormous pots to create a vacuum. A family might put up 200 jars in a single weekend. Those jars lined basement shelves like soldiers, providing the foundation for every sauce, stew, and braise through the winter and spring. The natural fermentation that occurred during storage produced lactic acid bacteria that modern research now identifies as beneficial to gut health. Scientists at universities are publishing papers about what Italian grandmothers figured out with their bare hands a century ago. Those tomato jars were not just food storage, they were medicine, tradition, and insurance against a hard winter, all sealed under a circle of tin. Sunday. Gravy, the all-day tomato sauce loaded with meatballs, sausage, braciole, ammascia, and pork ribs that simmered from early morning until mid-afternoon, was the sacred ritual of the Italian immigrant kitchen. The pot went on the stove before church. The smell met the family when they walked back through the door. Mothers stood over that pot for 6 hours, stirring, tasting, adjusting. The sauce started thin and sharp, raw tomatoes and garlic, and finished thick, sweet, and deep, every piece of meat tender enough to fall apart on the plate. The first course was pasta dressed in the sauce. The second course was the meat, arranged on a platter served with bread. The meal lasted 2 hours. 3 generations sat at one table. Arguments broke out, laughter filled the room, and children snuck bread into the sauce pot when no one was looking. American neighbors heard the noise through the walls and could not understand why dinner took all day. They did not yet know that Sunday gravy was not about eating. It was about belonging. Number 1. Homemade pasta rolled by hand on a floured wooden board with a long wooden rolling pin was the single most important skill an Italian immigrant woman possessed. Flour, eggs, salt, and the strength of 2 arms, that was all it took to make fettuccine, ravioli, cavatelli, or orecchiette. The dough was mixed on the board, kneaded until smooth and elastic, rested under a damp cloth, then rolled thin enough to read a newspaper through. Grandmothers cut noodles with a knife. Aunts shaped orecchiette with their thumbs. Children helped fill ravioli, pressing the edges shut with a fork. In the 1920s in Brooklyn, when a box of factory-made pasta cost 8 cents, making it by hand seemed irrational to outsiders. But homemade pasta cooked in 2 minutes, held sauce differently, and had a texture that no machine could replicate. It tasted like the hands that made it. And in a country that wanted these immigrants to forget where they came from, making pasta by hand was an act of defiance. Every sheet rolled out on that wooden board said the same thing. We are still here. We remember, and we are not stopping. These 25 dishes were more than food. They were the culture Italian immigrants carried across the Atlantic, protected behind apartment doors, and passed to their children despite every pressure to abandon the old ways. Try one this week. Make pasta by hand. Put up a jar of tomatoes. Fry a squash blossom. Then tell me in the comments which one you are going to try first.